First Person Advisors is now a subsidiary of NFP, the fifth largest insurance broker in the world, combining local expertise with access to global capabilities and solutions. Learn more at firstpersonadvisors.com.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
To know what makes Fort Wayne Mayor Tom Henry tick, you have to go back to what influenced him, whether it was JFK or Mahatma Gandhi.
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Or his dad, Jerome. The apple didn't fall far from the tree there. Tom Henry inherited his father's passion for community service. He's now in his fourth term in charge of growing Indiana's second largest city.
Wallet Hub has named Fort Wayne the third best run city in the country and the number one city in Indiana for 2021.
Tom Henry, civic leader, visionary, and catalyst behind an evolution in the Summit City. He's my guest this week on the Business and Beyond podcast. Fort Wayne Mayor Tom Henry was born into a big tribe, one of 17 children. Family lessons that rubbed off on Henry's leadership style: inclusive, devoted, cohesive. Henry was born in Indianapolis, but grew up in Allen County, graduated from what was then Central Catholic High School in Fort Wayne, and stuck around, earning a bachelor's and master's in psychology from the University of St. Francis. He spent a couple of years in the U.S. Army in the early 70s, serving on the Fort Wayne City Council for 20 years before being elected mayor in 2007. Henry went on to win 3 more terms as mayor, 4 in all, leading Fort Wayne's transformation into a world-class city. And I'm pleased to be joined on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast by Fort Wayne Mayor Tom Henry. And Mayor, thanks for joining me.
Gary, it's a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hey, what is going on in Fort Wayne? I tell you, for those people who have not been there in recent years, there truly is a transformation going on in downtown Fort Wayne. So many projects, so many things, embracing the riverfront with Promenade Park, Star Bank with a headquarters, the Electric Works, that massive project that is now underway. Give us your take on the activity, the action in particular in downtown Fort Wayne.
Well, Gary, several years ago when I first became mayor, Fort Wayne at that time was a pretty dormant community, as were a lot of cities in the Midwest. Many of us had lost the industrial base. Many of our manufacturing positions had moved elsewhere. And we were all really struggling, trying to find a name for ourselves. We knew we were all heading into a more and more competitive environment as far as attracting employers. So I sat down with my staff after I was elected mayor, and we tried to determine how we could put ourselves in the most attractive position to be able to compete with mayors of other cities. And we decided that our downtown should serve as the catalyst for future development in our community. Because, if a potential employer or you yourself as a visitor, if you would come into our downtown and see, crumbling streets and broken up sidewalks and boarded up storefronts and so on, the probability of you coming back was probably pretty low. Conversely, if we had a vibrant, thriving, exciting downtown with all kinds of hospitality offerings, theater district, and so on, then that might raise that probability significantly higher. And that's the option that we chose. So over the last 14 years, we've, in partnership with the private sector, we've invested, I just heard, a little over $1 billion in our downtown.
Wow.
And I think as a result of that, more and more developers, more and more companies are taking a second look at Fort Wayne. And that's been very exciting. And as you said, we've also decided to embrace our river, or rivers, as I should say. We actually have 3 rivers that converge in the middle of our downtown. And we've decided to embrace those rivers as well and try to make them a point of destination.
I'm sure you could point to several things, but a lot of people have told me over the years that they really point to Parkview Field, a minor league ballpark, as really being the spark that set a lot of this stuff in motion.
You're absolutely right, Gary. And there's no doubt that we needed to have something serve as the foundation for the growth of downtown. And our previous mayor, Graham Richard, actually made the decision to put the ballpark downtown. We used to have one out by our Coliseum. Unfortunately, it was made in an older style of architecture. It was not a very attractive building. It was all just basic concrete. And the time came for it to either be completely remodeled, redone, or raised and rebuilt, or raised and built elsewhere. And the latter option was the one that was chosen. And our mayor decided downtown Fort Wayne might be the place for it. So we took a rather depressed area of downtown, and through purchasing of several businesses, I think in a couple of cases we might have had to use eminent domain, but nevertheless, we eventually were able to secure an entire city block. And it was decided that's where the ball diamond was going to go. And I'll share with you that it was a very, very controversial decision.
Yeah.
Most of the citizens did not want it downtown. They didn't think that it would be successful downtown. But the decision was made. Council hung tough. They agreed with the mayor. And ultimately, the stadium was built, unfortunately, during his tenure. But just as the stadium was finished, he left office. I came in. And I was present then for the very first ball game. And then from that point, we began to build some supporting businesses in the area. Mm-hmm. We built a new hotel and a mixed use building and so on. And as you said, from that point on, I think success brought more success.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, reflecting on that, the easy thing to have done would have been to not build it. I mean, it was very controversial, been easy not to do it. But it seems to me, and I've had other people tell me this, that political leadership, private sector, everybody came together and felt very strongly this was the right decision and went ahead with it. And obviously it's been proven to be a success.
You're right, Gary. It was, as I mentioned, a very controversial decision. It took some real courage and leadership on the part of those that were in charge at that time. But as a result, we've had 3 more hotels built downtown, a number of restaurants opened up, including one of our newest restaurants, Ruth's Chris. And now we have another development taking place, as you mentioned in your early remarks. Star Financial Bank has chosen downtown Fort Wayne as its home of its new headquarters. We have another mixed use going up next to a park that we built on the river. So it's just continuing. We actually, as I jest a little bit, but there's a little bit of a serious tone. I'm beginning to run out of money. Every one of our developers and contractors obviously want to partner with the city, and that certainly is something that I endorse, public-private partnerships. But it does take access to capital to make these things happen. And all of these individuals are looking to Fort Wayne, which is a wonderful compliment to our citizens and to those involved in the whole economic development initiative. But we're getting to the point now where I'm having to go back to my city council and to the state legislature saying, in order to keep this continuing, we're going to have to figure out some different revenue streams.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned Fort Wayne as you look historically, traditional Midwest manufacturing town. I happened to be a reporter there at Channel 21 when Harvester, unfortunately, I remember it very well, when the Harvester plant closed. And I don't know that a lot of people appreciate how devastating that was for Fort Wayne, for the economy. And, that impact was felt for years and years and years. So to see all the things that you have going on now, is especially interesting, I think, in light of what happened many years ago at Harvester.
Well, there's no question. International Harvester, General Electric, Tokheim. Gary, you and I both grew up here. Fort Wayne made things. We were a manufacturing community. We made Jeeps and we made trucks and we made engines and we made gas pumps and we made axles, and I can go on and on. That's what we did. And as you mentioned, International Harvester at one time employed over 10,000 people. General Electric, which they also left, which is now being converted into Electric Works, they employed over 10, 12,000 people. So literally a massive amount of our citizens were employed in the manufacturing sector. Well, that all left in the late 70s, early 80s. And our city took a hit. And that's one of the reasons why I mentioned earlier, our downtown was so dormant. There was nothing here. Mm-hmm. Everybody had left. And we were in a real hurt, as were many of my colleagues in other communities. But we decided that we needed to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, as they say, and reinvent ourselves. But this time, make sure that we were not just a one-horse town, that we had to be able to spread and diversify our economic base. So we began to develop what we call clusters. And we still have manufacturing as a major cluster, a General Motors plant here and the Dana Corporation with its axles and so on. We still make things here. But now we've involved ourselves in healthcare, as has many other communities. But we also are very heavily engaged in education, in the hospitality industry, Department of Defense, and so on. So we spread ourselves out. So if this happens again, if we go into a recession again, as we did back in the 80s, that hopefully if one or two sectors go down, the others can act as buoys to help our city continue.
Yeah, as you look at it, there's a lot of focus at the state level on regional economic development. As you look in Northeast Indiana, Fort Wayne obviously is the center, if you will, that business, arts, cultural, healthcare center of Northeast Indiana. But do you sense, because it always certainly hasn't been that way, whether it's Northeast Indiana, Southeast, wherever it is, that regional cooperation always hasn't existed to the extent that people would like it to see. Do you see it happening or changing there in Northeast Indiana?
Actually, I think it's changed significantly over the years. Gary, I agree with you. For a number of years, there was this autonomy that existed throughout our state, that every community wanted to be important by themselves, that they and only they were going to contribute to a certain part of our state. And that made it very difficult a lot of times for good active dialogue to take place and cooperation. Much of what we do now is done on a regional basis. But for years, that wasn't the case. It was a very competitive environment. And if people up in Auburn or in Columbia City, if the city government there found out that some of their citizens were actually working in Fort Wayne, they weren't very happy about that. But that was the situation. We were the biggest city. We are the biggest city in about 100-mile radius. So a lot of people, especially in the contiguous counties, work in Fort Wayne. And once we realized that what's good for Fort Wayne is good for the entire region, and that we should be working together to develop products and services that had a regional application, that in fact we could take beyond the region and market elsewhere, I think there was a real transformation that took place as far as the thinking of elected officials and of other businesses. And we've come a long way. We're still somewhat in the embryonic stages of what we can do as a region, but we've come a long way.
Yeah. What keeps you up at night as mayor? I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of things, but in particular from some of the many challenges facing mayors all over the country, what keeps you up at night?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, Gary. For a number of years, it was access to capital. I wanted to make sure that we had sufficient cash flow and revenue streams to support the dreams and aspirations we had for our community. But we've been able to accomplish a lot of that. And thanks to our state legislature and thanks to, again, private-public partnerships, we've been able to move ourselves in the right direction. What concerns me now, it does keep me awake now, believe it or not, is the health and safety of the men and women we have in public safety. Such a change has taken place over the past several years relative to the respect that police officers and firefighters have received. It's really been saddening to see what has happened in that whole arena. Now, some of it was brought on by the officers themselves, and there's certainly no excuse for that. But the whole feeling about public safety in general is really disturbing. Now, let me say that firefighters, though, for the most part, are still objects of affection. Most people still love firefighters. But the police officers, obviously a very dangerous profession, one that really puts families in harm's way every day. Again, the dignity that went with that position in previous years has eroded significantly. And I worry about my officers because I just don't know what society has in store for them today.
Yeah. Is there anything that can be done? Because that is a big issue all over the country. Is there anything that can be done in your view, or you would like to see happen to kind of turn the tide or swing things back?
I don't think there's any question that a real emphasis needs to be put on education on both ends of the spectrum. I think citizens need to really get an understanding of what a police officer's job entails. And we do have a program here in Fort Wayne where we actually take groups of citizens out to our police academy and subject them to some of the training that these officers go through. And I think it really raises an awareness of what these officers have to decide in a split second sometimes. But at the same time, we need to, I think, increase the sensitivity of our police officers. We need to make sure that they understand the true value of diversity and of changing cultures. Now, one of the things we did recently is we put some social workers actually on our police staff, because many times our police officers are asked to get involved in situations where they really don't have the training in working with the homeless, for instance. All our police officers can do is actually pick them up sometimes physically and move them out of a particular location. Well, that really doesn't get to the root of the problem. So we've hired some social workers now to take on some of those tasks that our police officers were asked to take care of before. And I think that's going to help us significantly as well, so that they can truly spend most of their time doing what they were trained to do.
Much more with Fort Wayne Mayor Tom Henry coming up. We'll get to know the mayor a little more intimately. His growing up largely in Fort Wayne, came from a very large family, and his commitment to community service. That and much more when the Business and Beyond podcast continues.
First Person Advisors is now a subsidiary of National Financial Partners, the fifth largest insurance broker and consultant in the world. Develop your total reward strategies all in one place with the combination of First Person's local expertise and NFP's global resources and integrated solutions. Learn more at firstpersonadvisors.com.
Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week is Fort Wayne Mayor Tom Henry. And Mayor, we've been talking about the dramatic transformation taking place there in Fort Wayne. How would you, for folks who aren't maybe familiar with Fort Wayne, someone growing up in Fort Wayne today versus when you were growing up in Fort Wayne, talk about the differences. Very different place, I would assume.
It has changed significantly, Gary, over the years. Again, years ago, it was a very stable community, again, resting primarily on manufacturing positions, good paying. Most of them were union jobs. And everybody knew their place. And when you graduated from high school, if you didn't go off to college, you were probably going to be employed by one of about a half a dozen different manufacturers. And that's the way it was. And that's the way it was for years. But because of the changing paradigm, if you will, in the entire industry, as far as manufacturing jobs, for the most part, moving elsewhere, and the introduction of a lot of new segments in our community, a lot of new business sectors, whether it was information technology or computer-aided manufacturing and design and so on, a whole new emphasis was being placed on skill sets needed to be in certain communities. And I think that's what's happened to Fort Wayne, is we've realized that we needed to offer, particularly young people, much, much more as far as educational pursuits than we had in the past. So we've really broadened the educational base of our community to include a lot more than the standard liberal arts offerings.
Right.
And we now have full medical schools. We have physical therapy and occupational therapy and nursing. That's in the healthcare industry. We actually have classes on hotel, motel management and restaurateur activities, because we know we're a large hospitality community. So we've been slowly beginning to put together offerings of skill sets that are going to be needed for our community now and into the future.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I've got to know what growing up was like for you. And the reason I say that is you are one of 17 kids, right? 16 brothers and sisters.
Right.
That had to be a very interesting childhood.
Well, we were a good Catholic family. Mom and Dad are no longer with us, but I do have 16 brothers and sisters, 10 brothers and 6 sisters. Now, I did lose a brother as a result of Vietnam, but the rest of us are alive and well. When Mom left us a couple of years ago, she had 60 grandchildren and 90 great-grandchildren. I think the Henry family is alive and strong in the city of Fort Wayne, and I sometimes give credit to all of them for keeping me in elected office. At least I think I'm getting their help, but it was quite the experience. My father was a local social worker. He chose that field, even though it never paid much financially. He had a real desire to be of service to others in our community. And I've had some brothers and sisters follow in that same field. Many of us have gone into businesses of our own. I've got a number of brothers who own their own organizations and are doing well. So Fort Wayne has been very good to the Henry family, and we in turn are trying to give back in our own way.
Yeah, the impact, everyone's impacted certainly by their parents, but I sense the impact of your mother and father was especially significant to you and throughout your life.
Gary, I thank you for saying that. I think you're exactly right. Mom and Dad try to instill in us a real need for service to others. I try very hard to be a good public servant, to be a servant leader. I think I can say the same thing for all of my siblings who are in positions where they have people working with them, that we all try to never forget where we came from. It's easy sometimes if you move up the scale and as you get more and more successful to forget about those that are also trying to work their way up the ladder. And we've tried never to forget that. In fact, if we begin to deviate from that, the siblings will let us know in a heartbeat that you're going off the path. You need to get back on. But again, thank you. My mom and dad were very, very special people. As far as I'm concerned, one of a kind. To be able to have 17 children and support us on a social worker's salary was in and of itself a phenomenal feat. But I think mom and dad would be very proud of all of us.
Yeah. Well, obviously community service, public service was instilled in you. Do you think in this day and age, with social media and the conflict that seemingly exists in the public square constantly, do you think that fewer people want to get engaged now in public service and community service because of the dynamics that are out there?
Unfortunately, Gary, you're absolutely right. it's becoming increasingly difficult for people to step up and be a part of the field of public service, primarily because of what is going on, not only in social media, but the whole feeling that in order to get elected, that you need to not just talk about your own attributes and your own possibilities, but to degrade your opponent. And anymore, elections are getting very, very uncomfortable for people, and you have to lay yourself out totally anymore when you run for an office, and not only you yourself, but now they're bringing in family members. It's becoming, as they say, dirty politics, and that's really unfortunate. We all know that negativity sells, and people want to hear the worst about people, and it still surprises me. But nevertheless, that's unfortunately the world that we live in. And it's no wonder that we have a very, very difficult time recruiting people to run for office. There are some outstanding individuals in our community who would make wonderful politicians and wonderful government officials, but they just will not go through the campaign process. Not only the process of running for a campaign, but once you get elected, that you're constantly in a fishbowl. And there are those out there who want to make your life very uncomfortable, and they can do it.
Yeah. As you look, so many projects going on in Fort Wayne. Mentioned Electric Works. For a city of any size to pull that off is an accomplishment, but to do it during a pandemic too is quite a coup. As you look at the two things I wanted to talk about, one is the Electric Works project, because that's the old General Electric campus there that had been vacant. It's going to be transformed into a live, work, play environment. What do you see that becoming? How do you see it? And I know Do It Best is going to be an anchor there as well. How do you see that development taking shape?
Well, Gary, I think what we're trying to do is to introduce to our community an extremely large idea of truly taking a facility that's over 1 million square feet and transforming it into exactly what you just said, a live, work, play environment, to be able to live in a facility and work in that same facility as well. And then after hours, you play. You never have to leave that campus. Now, it is a very, very large campus. And what we're trying to do is to put different offerings in different buildings. So you may live in the apartment complex, but have to walk across campus in order to go to one of the breweries or one of the restaurants. But the whole idea, again, is for those who feel that they don't need to leave the neighborhood on a regular basis, that much of what their needs and wants and desires are on a daily basis are within that campus atmosphere. Now, what we're developing now is about a $265 million initiative. Again, it's a little under 1 million square feet, but that's only half of the General Electric campus. There's another almost 1 million square feet across the street, and that's phase 2. We'll get there eventually. But right now, the Do It Best facility will be open sometime in 2022. And we're also in the process now of securing ground for a parking garage. And as I mentioned, additional apartments. I can go on and on. We're going to have educational offerings there in the STEM arena. One of our hospitals is putting some healthcare offerings. We have a Sweetwater Sound that's going to be putting some musical offerings. So it's going to be a very diverse place. There's going to be a food court, and there's going to be a farmer's market, all kinds of different opportunities. But the whole idea, again, is to say, we've got this huge campus that we're going to be offering a number of different possibilities to people. And it's all walkable, too. There's a number of neighborhoods in the area, so you don't necessarily have to get into a vehicle and drive there. In many cases, you can walk.
Yeah. And the other project, and so many cities are beginning to embrace the water now and rivers. And as you mentioned, 3 rivers. Let's see, it's the Maumee, the St. Joe, and the St. Mary's, right?
That's correct. That's
great. Okay, I remember from my time in Fort Wayne. We'll talk about that, because that's a major undertaking, and I think has the potential, to really be something special and something that's really kind of an iconic piece of what Fort Wayne will be in the future.
Well, thank you, Gary, for using the word iconic. That's exactly what we were hoping to do with that, is to really make it a point of regional destination. As you mentioned, we do have the St. Mary's and the St. Joe that converge together in the middle of our town, and they create the Maumee, the mighty Maumee that goes over through Ohio. We fought those rivers for years because during high water events, they would flood our downtown, they would flood our neighborhoods, they flood our thoroughfares, so you couldn't drive anywhere. It was pretty brutal. In fact, when I first got on city council back in the 80s, that was one of our major issues, was how do we control all this flooding? So we pumped in millions and millions of dollars in building levees and sandbagging but the more we did, the worse it got. We were just moving water around to other parts of the city. So finally, we figured out that, maybe battling these rivers was not the answer. Perhaps we should flip it completely around and embrace our rivers. So what we ended up doing, in summary, was we purchased a lot of floodplain area that in some cases had very few homes. In the cases where they did, we would buy the homes, and we set it up so that during high water events, the water would go into those floodplain areas and not flood our neighborhoods and not flood downtown. Once we were able to accomplish that, we began to build along the rivers. And we recently, within the last couple of years, built, as far as I'm concerned, a very magnificent park-type atmosphere along the river. We've won several awards, and I'm really very, very, very proud of those who put that together. And now next door to that, there's a new $90 million mixed-use development that's being built. The garage will be open next year, and then the following year, all of the apartments and townhomes and offices. And now they're getting ready to build a second one. So we're continuing to expand our emphasis on the rivers in a mixed-use type of arrangement where we have retail and office space and living space, along with a park-type atmosphere all the way up and down. In this particular case, it's the St. Mary's.
Very good. Okay, this is you're in your fourth term now, and I think you have indicated that this is going to be your last term, right?
Well, as you know, you never say never in politics, but as it sits right now, I've had a very, very enjoyable, blessed tenure in politics. Again, as you mentioned, I had 20 years on city council. I have 16 as mayor. 36 years is a long time to be involved in any career. And we're trying to position our city so whoever takes my place will have a foundation that hopefully they can work off of in a real positive fashion. Now, that being said, you never know what the next year or two offers. You don't know nationally what's going to happen to the economy, what might happen in the healthcare arena, and so on. So I've got to leave a little bit of a crack in the door. But as it sits right now, I sometimes you just know when it's time to go home.
Good. Well, I know you'll give us the scoop on that, right, when you make your final decision. So we look forward to that.
You'll be one of the first to know.
Okay, good. Well, Mayor Tom Henry, it has been a real treat. It always is to catch up with you. From a reporter in Indianapolis to look up in Fort Wayne and see what's going on is really a positive thing. So much activity and vibrancy going on in Fort Wayne. And that's important, not only for Northeast Indiana, but for the entire state of Indiana. So I appreciate your work, and thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Gary, it's been my pleasure entirely. Thank you, and have a great holiday.
All right. And thank you for joining us on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast. It is a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can listen to all of our episodes of the Business and Beyond podcast at InsideIndianaBusiness.com, where you can find Indiana business news 24/7. Thanks for joining us. I'm Gary Dick. We'll see you next time.